You may be seated, and good morning. Welcome to GatheringPoint. My name is David, and I have the privilege of serving on the team here. If you're someone that calls GP home, let me say welcome back, and if this is your first time, we hope it will be the first of many. The official end of summer is not for another month or so, but it's never too early to celebrate. We know that the transition to fall means a change in routine for many of you in the room, and we want to transition well. Next Sunday, August 31st, we are going to be hosting our end of summer party following both our 9 and 10:30 services. Out on the front lawn, we will have games and inflatables. We're going to be joined by Joey's Red Hot food truck. So if a hot dog doesn't sit well at 10 a.m., certainly you will enjoy a treat from our incredible staff with Love a Latte, who will be here as well. We look forward to a great time of fun and connection, and we look forward to joining you next Sunday for the end of summer party. Today, we're going to be wrapping up our series, The Doctor is In. Now, hearing those words is pretty good news, especially if you're sick or injured. Back in 2013, I dislocated my finger playing a game of basketball. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and my wife, Katie, convinced me not to look up a fix on YouTube and instead drove me to the emergency room of one of our local hospitals. I got checked in and was pretty quickly wheeled back to a room for an x-ray. So let me give you fair warning. We're going to put an image on the screen. You're free to close your eyes, but it's just an x-ray. Go ahead and take a look. Yeah. If you can't tell, it's my ring finger it's my pinky there that was dislocated. And so after the x-ray, they pushed me in a wheelchair, thankfully, back to the room that I was waiting in. And every minute felt like an hour. My hand is throbbing, it's in pain. I'm wondering, when will relief come? And then the man in the scrubs walks in. The doctor is here. We're going to get down to the bottom of this injury. He asked me what happened. I told him playing a game of basketball, went for a steal, fouled the guy, ended up dislocating my finger. And he assessed the x-rays, looked at my hand and said, well, we've got two options. He said, option one, I can give you a series of shots. It's going to numb your hand up. And he assured me that this option was not only more expensive, but I would be there longer because I'm waiting for the medicine to kick in. And I'm thinking, the miracle of modern medicine. Like, thankfully, this isn't 1900. This is like going to be an easy fix. And I said, let's do it. And he said, well, don't you want to hear option two? I said, okay. And we're going to call this the Dr. Quinn medicine woman option, because he said, well, you can just grit your teeth and I'll just put it back in place. Yeah. And my wife, Katie, is sitting there to my left. She and I have been married less than a year at this point, and I still felt the need to impress her. And so I stick my hand out and I said, make it quick. He said, let me know if the pain becomes unbearable. We'll figure something out. And the next 10 seconds felt like 45 minutes. This guy yanked and pulled and prodded and twisted and pushed and did all sorts of things, and my vision begins to blur. The room is going dark, and just before I end up on the floor, he says, I don't know what the problem is, let me get the doctor. And before I could say, who are you, as I fall to the floor, he pulls back the curtain, and I kid you not, true story, the first thing I see in the hallway is a janitor's cart. Now, what I soon learned is that an employee with custodial services is cleaning the room next to us, and the doctor that was assisting me was a soon-to-be doctor doing his residency. The emergency room doctor, he comes in, we talk through, he thinks, oh, you're gonna need surgery. He refers me to Oak Orthopedics, and to make a long story short, the next morning I go to Oak Orthopedics, and the specialist there fortunately goes with option number one, and about 14 hours after the injury, I finally found relief. Now, here's what I learned in this story, is that when you're hurting, you want someone that you can trust. When you're in pain, credibility matters, and that's true not just in the emergency room, but really in all areas of life. You see, when it comes to the deepest questions that you and I struggle with and deal with, guesswork and rumors are not going to get the job done. And this is why the Gospel of Luke stands out. You see, Luke wasn't just a storyteller. He was a doctor. He was detail-oriented. He was compassionate. He was intentional. He took the time to investigate the claims of who Jesus was, and he gives us an orderly account in the Gospel of Luke of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, so that you and I might have confidence in what it is that he's saying. And in this series, The Doctor is In, we get to hear expert testimony from Dr. Richard Thompson, who is one of the members here of GatheringPoint. He's gonna help us lean into what it is the Gospel of Luke is saying to us today in 2025. Because after all, if you're gonna stake your life on something, you wanna hear it from a credible source. I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning. The good news is that the doctor is in.
We as people often get stuck in something like a feedback loop, which speaks back to us over and over and over again. The negative cycle can keep painting a gloomy picture that can drag us down in our lives. But also positive perspective can encourage us and can help us to improve. We see these same sorts of things in biblical stories. Certain kinds of themes that recur and are repeated, certain kinds of ideas that that are repeated and are a part of the story of God. In Luke's gospel, and as he continues in the book of Acts, there are recurring themes, a feedback loop, if you will, that reappears over and over again, that feeds into the story because of its importance, feeds into the broader perspective. A key theme, if you will, in Luke's story of Jesus is Jesus' resurrection and ascension. In other words, Luke does not just get to the end and say, oh, by the way, Jesus was arrested, crucified, buried, and was raised from the dead. But throughout the gospel account, Luke tells the story in a way that says this ministry is about this, and that it is leading to this, that this is working with this in mind. This is a part of God's plan. And so although there are lots of examples, here's several references that illustrate this. In chapter 9, Jesus is responding to Peter's affirmation of him as the Christ of God. And Jesus responds and says, the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day rise again. Also in that same chapter, in chapter 9, verse 51, and Luke is unique among the Gospels in this regard. Luke refers to the days that drew near for Jesus to be taken up. It's the end of Jesus' ministry in Galilee, and so as he begins to travel toward Jerusalem in the south, this description of him being taken up, this reference to his ascension. And so once again, Luke gives these markers throughout his account to indicate that this is not just his ministry, but it is his ministry that is leading to his resurrection, his death, resurrection, and ascension. One last one, and there are many others, but in chapter 18, not long before Jesus enters Jerusalem, Jesus states, we are going up to Jerusalem, and he states that he will be handed over to the Gentiles, and he will be mocked and insulted and spat upon, and after they have flogged him, they will kill him, and on the third day, he will rise again. So these references are interspersed throughout the gospel, indicating that his death, resurrection, and ascension are a part of his life, and not just something that happens accidentally at the end. So as Luke looks back and tells the story, he does so through the lenses of resurrection and ascension. It is a story of the resurrected and glorified Jesus. It is the story of this Jesus whom, as the book of Acts then later declares, God validated, and through whom God gives God's Spirit to the people of God.
Feedback loops that Dr. Thompson is talking about there, we live with them all the time. I don't know how well we articulate them, but they happen all the time. Some of you have feedback loops in your life that are negative, and some of those negative feedback loops have to deal with money, and some of you kind of have this idea that we're never gonna have enough, and we're not gonna have enough for this week. We don't have enough for that. No, we can't eat out today. We don't have enough money for that. You haven't even looked. You don't even know. It's just a loop that plays constantly in your head that you go, there's a shortfall, there's a shortcoming, there's not enough for us to do this. Some of you have a feedback loop that goes in your head that talks about like not being enough. You assume when you look in the mirror, when you think about doing something new, there is a loop that plays on repeat over and over in your head where you go, I don't think I could do that. I want to, but I don't know if I could. And it happened probably when you were really young, where you just started to cycle and you began to kind of self-talk yourself out of it, and you've just decided that that is gonna be the case. Some of you have a loop that plays in your head that talks about the fact that you're gonna mess up. I always mess up. I always screw up. I'm not enough for you. I can't be enough for you. I can't do that. And it's a loop that just plays constantly in your head. Doesn't even mean that it's true, doesn't mean that it's accurate, but you've made it true because you've repeated it enough in your mind that it just kind of circles and cycles back for that. Some of you is family tension. Some of you, I'll say a word and you'll begin to start a loop. Thanksgiving dinner, right? Christmas with the family. And some of you have loops that are positive and you go, oh, it'll be wonderful. Some of you are like, oh gosh, I hope that person's sick, can't come. They make it miserable. They can't handle that, how this is gonna work. And what happens is we carry these loops and we replay them over and over and over and over again. And for the negative loops, they paralyze us because they project on our future something that might be true, could be true, but hasn't happened, isn't true, hasn't happened yet. And some of you look in your life right now and you go, yeah, I can see those. I can see those. Now, some of you have positive feedback loops, right? You have an encouragement from a friend, and every time you're in that situation, you're like, oh, man, and you begin to see positive loops. You have words of affirmation that will play in your head. Some of you have confidence because the feedback loop continues to say, you can do this, I can do this, I am good enough, and that begins to play in your head as well. Well, Luke is the physician that we've talked about. He's the doctor. He is the investigator who is very thorough, very detailed. And he begins to highlight in the life of Jesus where he begins to see, as Dr. Thompson pointed out, that there are loops that take place in the gospel. There are things that are repeated over and over and over. And like a positive feedback loop and a negative feedback loop, this is a spiritual feedback loop that Luke wants us to get circled into so that we begin to both mentally and spiritually, we begin to get ourselves caught up in this loop so that we begin to have words and phrases that will begin to be thinking so when we find ourselves in situations, we're not just getting stuck in the negative or the positive feedback loops, because negative feedback loops often lead to a sense of despair. Over positive feedback loops can give us a sense of arrogance. And he goes, you've got to watch this. It's not necessarily what Jesus says. He's like, I want you to watch this because Jesus has a spiritual loop that I think you would really benefit in your life as your life goes up and down and you have positive and negative days and you have positive experiences and negative experiences and you have positive employee relationships and negative ones. As your life goes up and down, I would like to connect you into a spiritual feedback loop, these repeated themes, and I want them, you, me, readers, both at that time, future readers, I want you to get caught up in a spiritual feedback loop that gets stuck in your head and stuck in your heart, because when life goes like this, you're gonna need something that continues to pull you through. And the feedback loop that Luke gives us is resurrection of Jesus and ascension of Jesus into heaven. And I think it's fascinating to me. I've done it, you've done it. We often treat the twist about the resurrection, and let's be honest, we really only talk about the resurrection when? Easter, right? Now go find eggs. Are we having ham or are we having not ham, right? I mean, that's really where the conversation begins to go. And so we're like, let's look at resurrection when it's not Easter, because it'll give it a different perspective as we begin to look at this. Because it's like on Easter, we always try to do like Christmas. It's always like, let's try to look at the Christmas story like we've never heard it. And everybody's like, yeah, but Jesus is going to be born in a barn, right? And you're like, well, it's not an actual barn. It's up on a hill. Okay, great. We could do that. And then Easter's the same way. Let's surprise on Easter Sunday with the resurrection of Jesus. What? He came out of the tomb this year? We have these things, but Luke is so helpful. Luke doesn't say, surprise, he's alive. Luke has a completely different theme. He goes, you should have seen this because I mentioned it a whole bunch. I don't know why we're all watching this event going, what? Because there's been a feedback loop that was established by Jesus from the very beginning that was saying that these things were going to happen. And Dr. Thompson highlighted them, and I want to look a little closer even at some of these passages, because the resurrection wasn't an afterthought. It was the point of the entire story and ministry of Jesus. And that's why I think Luke doesn't wait till the end to mention it. Surprise, not dead. Luke tells us over and over and over, and he's dropping hints and he's weaving it into his narrative. When he investigated thoroughly the events that took place in the person of Jesus, he sprinkles these in all over, and it's not surprise. So Dr. Thompson pointed out. Also, isn't it great? Like, you're not reading a commentary, you're spending time with one. This is fantastic. Luke chapter 9, verse 22, we have Peter's confession. Early on in Jesus' ministry, Peter's confession, and he says this, the Son of Man must suffer. This isn't surprise. We were told in chapter 9. Resurrection's not until chapter 24. He says, look, he's going to be rejected by the elders. I can't believe that trial went that way. We were already told it wasn't going to go that way. By the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed and on the third day raised to life. And the disciples are just like us. Who heard that? I heard it. Did you understand it? Well, I didn't think he was serious. Then just a few verses later, Luke frames again the entire journey of Jesus heading towards Jerusalem, right towards the resurrection and ascension, verse 51. As the time approached for what? The ascension, for Jesus to be taken into heaven. Wait, you already told us he was going to ascend into heaven? Yeah. Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. Luke is beginning to establish this looping narrative over and over and over. And before we actually hit the climax, before we enter into Jerusalem, Luke says in chapter 18, Jesus then once again establishes this loop, and this loop is going to be critical for you and I to live our daily lives, and we're going to spend a little time on this a little bit this morning because you and I have been through some things, and you still have some negative and positive feedback loops, and we desperately need to tap into this loop here today. Chapter 18, verse 31. Jesus again, before it happened, took the 12 aside and told them, we're going up. That's a topographical notation. They were in a lower, they were climbing up, Jerusalem's up. And everything that is written by the prophets about the Son of Man, that all those things will be fulfilled. This is going to happen. And Jesus will be delivered over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, future tense. They're going to insult him. They're going to spit on him. They will flog him, which is a form of beating. They will kill him, and on the third day he will rise again. And just to make sure this loop gets established, Luke doesn't end his storytelling with his gospel. Luke also writes the book of Acts, which is the actions of the apostle. It's what happened after Jesus' ascension and how essentially the church gets started, how it forms, how it spread, how the leaders begin to move in Acts. So Luke writes both the book of Luke, but he also writes a second account to Theophilus, the book of Acts, where we see what happens next. And in Acts, he starts Acts. We're just going to peel the corner back on Acts because he says this in chapter 1, verse 9. After he said this, then Jesus was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid them from their sight. Skip ahead. This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. Can you see the loop? Can you see this loop that Luke Luke and loop, that's fun. You should try saying that today. Luke wants us to see this loop over and over and over. Why? Because he wants you to know that this was always the point, that resurrection and ascension aren't just how the story ends, that is the story. That's the story. And I think one of the easiest mistakes that I make and that you can make is that we read the Gospels assuming that all four of the Gospels are the same. Because what would happen if we start to see our lives, and I'll help you with this in just a minute. What happens when we start to see our own story, the story of my life and the story of your life through the lens of resurrection? What happens when we do that? And maybe not just what happens, but how do we do that? We'll spend a little time on that today. And so we have Luke and we have Matthew and Mark and John, and they're each have a distinctive voice. They have a distinctive audience and a distinct point that they want us to get. But Luke, being the doctor, being the storyteller he highlights the resurrection that nobody else does. And we've tried our best to position this series as we're moving through the Gospel of Luke. And obviously, if we're at resurrection and ascension, we're at the end here today. And next week we'll start a new series where we're going to begin to talk about Jesus and some other things that he was engaged and involved in. But we've tried to think about how can we do this story a little bit like Netflix, where we talk about it, then we go to expert testimony. We talk about it, and we go to expert testimony. And so we're going to cut to expert commentary, where the guy who writes the commentaries is going to articulate. So listen to Dr. Thompson as he explains this so well.
All four Gospels describe the resurrection of Jesus, but all four Gospels describe the resurrection differently. One of the biggest mistakes we can make as readers of the Bible is to combine these accounts into one homogenized version in our minds. My technical theological term for this kind of reading is smushing. And such attempts to smush these accounts or combine these accounts together result in two things. One is we miss the distinctive messages that each gospel writer was making within their respective gospel. And two, we create a message from our unified gospel account that was never intended. So let's look at what we find in Luke's gospel, which offers the longest resurrection account of all the New Testament gospels. Now, we won't look at everything here, but a few things emerge from this chapter. The first 12 verses offer us the extraordinary picture of the women who followed Jesus. Luke's gospel already pictures women far more favorably as disciples of Jesus than the other Gospels in the New Testament. Women in Luke's Gospel are described as those who supported Jesus' ministry both financially and at least on occasions through hospitality. So we shouldn't be surprised that there's a larger group of women who cared for Jesus' body after the crucifixion and who went to the tomb in this gospel than in other gospel accounts. But what I think is noteworthy about Luke's version is his mention about them remembering Jesus' words after hearing the message of Jesus' resurrection. Whereas other versions refer to fear and other responses, only in Luke did the women remember and go and tell the apostles, and others, by the way. That the women were not believed in this account is another issue. But why was this? Why did they remember? Is that all there is to it? What is it about the women in Luke's gospel that helped them remember? Perhaps there's one other thing that Luke mentions that no other gospel includes that is a clue for us. At the end of chapter 23, as Luke describes what the women did while they were preparing Jesus' body before the onset of the Jewish Sabbath on Friday evening, Luke includes, or he states this: on the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. Think about that. The women thought Jesus was their Messiah, and yet he had just been executed. Their world was just destroyed. So what would they do now? In moments like this, many of us would throw our hands in the air in despair. Many of us have been there. And yet they did what they didn't, when they didn't know what else to do. And so they did what a good Jewish person would do. They rested. They Sabbathed. They worshiped. They kept their eyes on God. And perhaps that was enough to help them remember Jesus' words through their despair the next morning. Whatever happened, those women held on just enough to remember the good news. Sometimes that means putting one foot of faith in front of the other. Sometimes it means worshiping when we just don't feel like it. But Luke reminds us that in those contexts, we can find grace waiting for us because of Jesus' resurrection. Thanks be to God.
To me, you may not find this yet, maybe by the end here. I find that fascinating. Because it's one of these moments where Jesus does so often where he shows us how to do something, how to live through moments. And Luke highlights the activity of the women in this gospel. And right in the middle of their despair, right after their world has been torn apart, right in the middle of everything that they had hoped for was gone, right after the moment where they had concluded that, well, obviously he's not the Messiah, because if he was the Messiah, he wouldn't be dead right now. Right after all that takes place, this is where we pick up that the spiritual loop kicks in. The spiritual feedback loop kicks in because the women rested. Why? Because it was the Sabbath. That's what you do. When you don't know what to do, when your life is falling apart, there can be a spiritual loop that begins to propel and carry you through. They didn't panic. They didn't give up. They did the only thing they knew to do, and they looked at the calendar, and the calendar is what said, this is what we do. They kept the Sabbath. They put one foot in front of the other. They moved in the direction, even though they didn't feel like it, even though all was lost, even though emotion could have been all out of control. They let this loop begin to carry you through. And now for those of you who are grieving and hurting, and yes, we pray over all the prayer requests each and every week, and I know that's a lot of you. For those of you that are facing diagnosis, for those of you who are facing relational difficulties, for those of you who are facing job loss, for those of you who have uncertainty about the very things that are taking place this week, Jesus doesn't just tell you, he shows you through a loop. Through highlighting what these women do, how you make it through. Let's be honest. What Jesus says about making it through difficulties like grief isn't helpful. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, "Blessed are those who mourn." If you've ever been through grief, and if you've ever been through mourning, and if you've ever had something ripped out of your life and torn out of your life, let me tell you what you don't feel. Blessed. Hey, you're blessed. That can't be true. I don't feel blessed at all. Right? Feels like a curse. I mean, you'd like to get a blessing. So we watch these who are grieving, and we learn how to grieve. We learn how to go through difficult situations. We learn how to go through the worst parts of our life by watching what they do rather than listening to some advice. We watch what those who are hurting do and watch what their lives and what they do, and they have normal movement and rest, even though everything in their life says they shouldn't have normal movement and rest. And Luke writes it down in chapter 23, verse 56. They went home. They went and they did what you do when people die. They prepared spices, they prepared perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment of their heavenly Father. And this is where this connects to all of us, because you and I, we all know what it's like to be stuck in a loop. Some of us are stuck in loops of fear, and it just plays over and over, and it keeps us back, holds us back. Some of you are stuck in a loop of frustration, and you just can't seem to get past it. You can't seem to get over it. Some of you have such loops that play over and over in your head about doubt and self-doubt, and you look at your future and you just shake your head in disbelief and you wonder. Some of you have so much pain that just keeps circling and recycling that it feels like you can't even have tactile moments with those that you love the most, because the pain and the hurt and the grief, it just keeps looping over and over. And yesterday feels like the day before, and it feels like that, and this year seems the same as last year, and it's just this loop that plays over and over, and you just kind of feel like nothing good can come out of this. This is it. I can't do this. And these loops can trap us, keeping us from seeing God at work in the midst of our suffering, our pain, our disillusionment. And then we read this, and we see that their whole world collapsed. Jesus was dead, and all of their hope was buried in a tomb and sealed shut. And what did they do? They did the only thing they knew to do. They didn't panic. They didn't give up. They obeyed God, and they kept the Sabbath. They put one foot in front of the other, even though they didn't feel like it. And maybe that's why you're here today. Maybe literally you walked into the room today because you didn't know what else to do. And you're like, God, God, God. And I think this is where this story connects to all of us, not just because it's the Easter story, not because we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. We celebrate that every Sunday. That's why we gather. It's because you and I know what it feels like to get stuck in a loop, where a conversation is just on repeat over and over and over. You know what it feels like when everything in your life feels like despair, when the soundtrack in your head keeps saying over, there's no way forward. I don't think I can do it. I'll never make it. I'm not capable of this. I don't think I could say no. I don't think I could be able to be that honest. But here's the thing. The women did something extraordinary. They remembered. They remembered Jesus' words. And the loop broke. And despair wasn't the end of their story. Resurrection was. No, that's not dramatic. That's not heroic. It's deeply faithful. Putting one foot in front of the other is deeply faithful. They did the only thing they knew to do, even though they didn't know what God was doing. And in time, faith returned. Because the pain didn't disappear, not because Jesus' words came back, because in the middle of the despair, they held on long enough to hope, and hope reemerged. So what do you and I do when we don't know what to do? What should you and I think when we're not sure what to think? How should we respond when we're not sure what to respond? And the word that we have that's given to us is we remember. That's the invitation. Sometimes that's all you can do to take your next faithful step in life. Maybe for you, it's just show up at church. You don't know what to do, so you just keep showing up, even when you feel nothing. Even when you look at the words on the screen and you're like, I'd like to sing, I want to sing, and the person next to me there, look at that person, they're crying, raising their hand, and I'm like, I got nothing. But I know I need to show up. You open up your Bible, even when you go, you're reading it sometimes, and you're reading your Bible, and you go, I got nothing. And you hear other people, and they're like, oh, I read my Bible, and man, God spoke to me, and you're like, I don't even know how that happens. I read my Bible and go, I don't even know what I just read. You keep going because you pray even when you feel like the prayers aren't even leaving the room. It's like they hit the ceiling and they bounce right back down. You keep praying. And what happens is we see this loop, and Luke says that's where grace finds us. Not when you feel like it, but when you're faithful. Because the resurrection didn't happen after the women had it all figured out. It happened while they were grieving, while they were confused, and while they were doing just the next right thing. So I want to talk about this word remember. I've talked about it over the years as a friend of mine explained to this, as a chaplain explained it to him. Because this word remember, I think, is the word that we get wrong a lot. Because the opposite of remember is not forget. The opposite of remember is to dismember. It's dismember. And my life and your life is dismembered. Now, David's pinky, disgusting. It's a great visual. Nasty, but great visual. Our lives have a cadence to it that things feel like it's being torn apart, being taken apart, in grief and despair and doctor's diagnoses and your finances and work and cultures and all this kind of stuff. It begins to tear apart our lives. It dismembers it. But the women needed to remember. And what happens is it puts things back together the way God designed it to be back together. They remember. It's not that they forgot, it's that we need Jesus to show up and we need to remember him. This is why we have communion available at the end of each week. It's because it's Jesus' body and blood that's being remembered. Jesus even said, do this in what? Remember. I need you to remember, because life is going to dismember everything and you're going to have things that are torn apart all the time. But you need to remember the person of Jesus. And when you remember, it creates a loop where you can see Jesus in the midst of your hurting, in the midst of your pain. So let's take a look at this story that Luke paints out in Luke chapter 24. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared, because that's the only thing they knew what to do. And they went to the tomb. They found the tomb rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. And while they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them, and in their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Remember, put it back together, ladies. Do you remember how he told you? I know these events have dismembered and disoriented you, but put it back. While he was still with you in Galilee, he said, verse 7, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners. He said, be crucified and on the third day raised again. And then at that point, they remembered his words. They didn't just feel better. They just didn't have an emotional experience. They remembered the Lord Jesus was put back before them, and it reoriented their identity. They remembered who they were. They remembered whose they were. And Luke is the only gospel who includes these details. They remembered because he told them again and again and again. And this just wasn't a miracle moment. It was something the whole movement had been moving towards. It means this for you and for me. It means your brokenness doesn't get the final word. It means your regrets don't get the final word in your life. Your loss, your pain, and your past, that's not the end of your story. As Jesus planned to walk through death and come out the side, he lets you know that you can too, but it's about remembering so that you can see this person going with you even though your life dismembers some things that are very hard and tragic to deal with. And that loop in our life, when we begin to remember and play that on feedback over and over and over and over, what we find is that you're not stuck in your old story of who you once were anymore. You have been invited in a new one where Jesus' life is put back together. And if you remember nothing from this morning except for David's x-ray, remember this. You're not stuck in your old story anymore. You've been invited into a new one. And Jesus just didn't stumble and get caught in a crucifixion. He moved towards it for you because he knew that your life and my life would be dismembered from time to time. And he says to remember. And because of that, there's hope on the other side of your pain. There's hope on the other side of your confusion. There's hope on the other side of being overwhelmed. There's hope on the other side of your failure. There's even hope on the other side of death. And the doctor is in, and he's not just healing bodies, he's raising the dead. And that was the plan, and that was always the plan. So today, as we close, we're going to sing a song, and you're free to go pray. You're free to take communion. If you take communion today, remember. Maybe you need Jesus in your life right now to show up. Well, go take the cup. Back to your seat, take the bread, take the cup, and remember him. Maybe you need to light a candle and say, Jesus, today my life is dark, and I need some hope in the midst of that. And maybe you need to write a prayer, and it'd be our privilege to do that. Let me pray. Father, this morning as we live our lives, and some of us have had unbelievable weeks, some of us are struggling right now. Would you help us to remember, to put back together at the forefront of our mind as we even close our eyes now? May we visualize you, Jesus, moving towards us, loving, touching the areas in our life that are the most hurt, need the most hope, need the most wisdom, need the most guidance, need the most courage. And would you remember, because that's the part of the story that Luke told about the women that we need to hear this morning. And for that, we'll be glad and grateful. We love you.